I want to welcome everyone, especially the virtual church. We didn't have that when I first came here many decades ago now. and it is such a wonderful opportunity for me to come to this church and remember what a wonderful experience I had with people that some of you are still here. Anyways, most of them are gone. Yesterday, I had many of you know that I am a therapist, that I have an office and see people. Yesterday, I had a nurse who came. She is a Christian nurse. She spent a month in Italy with during the worst time of the coronavirus at the epicenter in Italy. And she told me that she had spent 30 days, 12 hours a day, no vacation time, no breaks, every day for 30 days, 12 hours a day. I mean, can you imagine that? And she says, you have to put all that equipment on, and you have to work with that equipment every day. But when you take a break, you better make it count, she says, because you have to take it all out and then put all of that equipment back on again. And she says, of the 10 patients she had, because there were two nurses, she would have them 12-hour shifts, one shift, and the other nurse would have these same 10 patients the other 12 hours. Of all the patients, of the 10 patients, only one survived. All of them died. So she described the pain of having to say goodbye and having to communicate with the family via gadgets, just because you couldn't have them come in. And she says, I was going to read you an email that she sent, but it would take a little too long. They flew on this Navy plane, I think it was, 30 nurses. I think there were more than one plane, but these planes turn into an intensive care unit where they land. They open up all these tents, inflatable tents right there with the plane. And so she says, in our team, our outcomes were 3 times better than the average in the United States and the average anywhere in the world. And she says, I believe that it was because we were Christians. We were praying for our patients. We were praying with the families. We were spending time incorporating spirituality in our work. That sounds very wonderful. And I praise her for the good work that she did. But the question in my mind, and the question that I want to think about this morning is, she only saved, there was only one out of the whole bunch of patients she had, only one was saved. Why wasn't it all 10 of them? They prayed. Jesus was there. It was a mission project. One was saved. And that was 3 times better. Why not more? I was so delighted to hear your story, Glenn, and the other lady that is not here. Many of us we're born in the church. We call that biological growth. The church grows biologically, and sometimes there are people that join us. For many people that join the church and experience a conversion, they come into the church with great expectations. For some of them, they think that there might be some miracles that might take place in their lives. They might hear Jesus talking to them, or they might be involved in a spirit-led adventure, perhaps like this lady uh, took. But the expectations sometimes are very high, that things are going to happen in their lives. A businessman may think that his business will flourish significantly to the point that people might say, that happens to him because he's a Christian. See? Or a student might join Jesus, might accept Jesus in his life, and he might say, well, now I should be able to have better grades. Maybe I'll have a 4-point average now because Jesus is with me. You see? Some might say, well, I'm paying tithe. The Bible says that I will open the windows of heaven, it says, to bless you. But then these people, just like the rest of us, find out that we suffer the same experiences that many people in the world suffer. We lose our jobs, we get coronavirus, and we get illnesses like the rest of the world. So it seems that something does not work out the way we expect it. People sometimes begin to get disillusioned. The businessman does not automatically experience that success, and so he gets a little discouraged. So faced with these realities, many Christians wonder if Christianity is indeed a superior way of life. Is God able? Is God willing to make a difference in the life of his children? Can I put my absolute trust in him? For most of us, the answer would be yes, of course. But then the question still remains. Why cannot its superiority, the superiority of Christianity, be proved beyond all doubt? Why is it that there is an ambiguity in there? When we look at the biblical data, we find that God was able to manifest his power in many instances. The Bible reminds us that God is both able and willing to make an obvious difference in the lives of his children. Remember Daniel's story? His experience with God became obvious to the point that a whole nation was commanded to recognize and worship the God of Daniel. David's triumph over Goliath, he presents another obvious demonstration to a foreign nation as well as to Israel of God's power. The same can be said of Moses, Joseph, and you can come up with many other examples. But then, if we're going to be fair, as we look at the data in the scriptures, we're also going to find those situations where God did not, or either he was unwilling or he was unable for some reason to make a difference in the life of his children. Remember John the Baptist? John the Baptist announced the coming of Jesus, prepare the way, and then he ends up in jail. Jesus is right there. He could have easily performed a miracle and saved John. What a wonderful job John had done. For some reason, Jesus was unwilling or unable. What was going on there? What about the disciples? The disciples spent time with Jesus. He dedicated his time here on earth to his disciples, yes, to humanity, but think of the disciples being with Jesus 3 years and a half, something like that, day and night following Jesus. And according to tradition, according to what we understand, all of them died as martyrs except Judas. There may be some questions with one or two, but we understand that they died as martyrs. They were his disciples. Couldn't have Christ perform a miracle to save them and protect them. Then you have Saul of Tarsus. Remember Saul? He was, when he was converted, before he was converted, this man he was the symbol of success at the time. He had been educated by Gamaliel, one of the best teachers at the time. He was a member of the Sanhedrin. That was the highest level of authority within the Jewish nation. I mean, he was a member there. You don't just get to be a member there very easily. He was a Roman citizen. I mean, as a Jew, he was also able to become a Roman citizen. Then he has his experience on the road to Damascus. He is converted. And he wrote most of the New Testament, actually. And but he has this very interesting experience, and it's found in 2 Corinthians 11. I want to read you this just because it's just so amazing. 2 Corinthians 11, 23 through 27. It says here, 3 times, well, I'm starting with verse 24. 5 times I have received at the hand of the Jews the 40 lashes, less 1. 3 times I have been beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I have been shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been adrift at sea, on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, dangers from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brethren, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. Would you share this experience? Glenn, what if they had read this story to you?
He didn't even talk about the thorn he had removed. God said no.
Yeah. See, we have a rosy picture of following Jesus, giving our life to Jesus, but things can change. And if they change, it's probably because you're doing a good job, according to God. So this is the reality that we face. So why does God allow this ambiguity regarding the value of Christianity? So I want to suggest to you that there are a couple of reasons, and this is always open for discussion. I'm not suggesting that this is the final answer to these questions, but at least a starting point. In the first place, it seems that God allows ambiguity to exist because it protects a person's freedom to choose, so that the person can give equal consideration both good and evil. Are you with me? Okay. God's way is so infinitely superior to Satan's that he veils his absolute goodness so that it does not appear as good as it really is, nor evil as totally evil. Now, we need to sit back a little bit and zoom out a little bit, because the reality is that this is an appearance of ambiguity. When you have truth and error mixed together, it appears that there is a confusion. But when we study Jesus at the cross, it's all clear. We know goodness to be infinitely good and badness, sin, to be infinitely bad. That's what the cross tells us. If you come to a junction, if you're on a road, and there is an arrow to the left that says Seattle, and the other one says Seattle, you're confronted with ambiguity. But then you pick up the map, and you start searching, and the ambiguity evaporates. One of them is the one that you will need to take. So, if one appear far more appealing, if one option appear far more appealing than the other, equal consideration would not be given to both options. As it is, one considers both sides of the question, and his free moral agency is protected. So I am suggesting that that's reason number one. The other reason for this ambiguity is that it allows God to be fair to Satan. God being fair to Satan? Did you hear that? I remember having some discussions about that with a very distinguished member of this congregation years ago. Remember Dr. Provenza? And we had some discussions on this. He wasn't totally sure that I was right, and I wasn't totally sure he was right. And I'm sticking to my position, and you see what you think, you know. He will never be able to say, that is God, no, Satan. Satan will never be able to say that the saved would have been his if he had only had a fair chance to win them over. God will have been given Satan a fair chance to win each of us over. He won't be able to say, Walter would be mine if I had had a chance like you did of winning him over. Now, just think about that. God must be fair to Satan in the light of the great controversy. While Satan accuses God of being unfair, God neutralizes these claims by showing himself fair to the very being making these accusations. God is fair to Satan not because he is obligated by the issues involved in the great controversy, but because he is fair by nature. God cannot not be fair. Isn't it? It's like God cannot be unforgiving. Can God be unforgiving? An unforgiving person? He is forgiveness personified. It is his nature to forgive. It is his nature to be fair. So that's how I look at it. Okay, so some interesting things to think about and to discuss in the context of these many issues, but the issues that are taking place now. But how do we approach this from a biblical perspective? What does the Bible have to say about this? The best evidence, I mean, there are many in the Bible, but the one that to me speaks the most clearly to these particular issues that we're discussing is the story of Job. You know the story of Job. I don't have to tell you the story. I just want to look over at some of the main features of the story. When Satan accused the patriarch of serving God because of expediency, he implied that God overwhelmed Job with blessings to the point that Job had no opportunity to consider alternatives. He said, you give him so much, you bless him so much, he doesn't want to do anything else but follow you. You know? And so that was his accusation. Since God had paved the road so nicely for him, Job saw no alternative but loyalty to heaven. Job's choice, according to Satan, had not been made in absolute freedom. Satan also implied that he did not have a chance equal to God's to win Job over. He's implying that you took the advantage. That's why he follows you. Just give me a chance and you'll see that he'll quit. He'll follow me. He'll serve me. Suggesting that God was unfair with Job and with him, Satan asked for a chance to prove his point. So now God is faced with this situation where he could just make a claim and say, no, you're wrong, Satan. Get out of here. You know, Job follows me. He wants to do it. He did it out of freedom, and you're wrong. He could have said that. But God doesn't work that way. So remember this morning as we discussed evidences? Evidences have to speak for themselves. God does not want us to take his word for it. He wants the truth to speak for itself. So let's see what I wrote here. Suggesting that God was unfair with Job and with him, Satan asked for a chance to prove his point. God, who had no choice but to let truth speak for itself, granted Satan's request in spite of what it would cost Job. Just think of Job's experience. He had no clue that this discussion was going on. Job remained loyal to God because he wanted to, not because it was expedient to do so. God had not forced Job's decision through his blessings. God had been fair to Satan. Although the devil almost killed Job, he could not cause him to be disloyal to God. So God had been fair to Satan in allowing him to get Job to reconsider his choice for God. And God had been fair to Job because Job had made his decision in total freedom to serve him. When things were bad, Job remained loyal. So he wanted to. He wasn't doing it because it was expedient for him to do so. After Job's trial, God restored to him twice as much as he had lost. You remember that? There's a problem with this. This should not be understood as a reward for Job's faithfulness. You see, a reward for being good suggests that you earned it. Now you are into legalism. You impress God with your performance, he gives you a double blessing. That's not the way God operates. That would be legalism, salvation by works. A person cannot impress God and win his favor. That God already loves us. Instead, I am suggesting here that God's double blessing to Job may be understood as his way of restoring the balance. See, remember the ambiguity? You have a sign to the right saying Seattle, the other sign to the left saying Seattle. Somehow, Satan was allowed to take extra time. He was allowed a pulpit in Job's life to persuade him to take a road that would have destroyed him. Job hanging there and did not take that road. But that voice was given more power for a while. It probably was maybe 2 months. Can you imagine being that long under this pressure? I heard somewhere that it was probably 2 months. I don't know for sure. So now that voice had gone too much, tilted so much, or the influence, the volume had been so loud in one direction. Now God brings it back to the middle because God would like to do that for all of us. He would want to give us the same blessings and way more. But there are many factors that limit what God can do for us. And so in this particular case, now God says, okay, now I have the right to do what I like to do for my servant Job, which I would do for others as well. So it wasn't earning anything. It was that now is my time to turn up my volume, and bring it back to a balance. That, to me, seems to be the most appropriate way to look at that section. God would like to bless every one of his children as he blessed Job. But his fairness limits him. God has to be fair to Satan. God has to be fair to Job. He would like to pour down his love and his blessings to us, but there are so many factors. If he blesses me too much, then he has to allow the enemy to have a louder voice. I may not be able to handle that. So God keeps me safe by giving me less so that he doesn't have to allow the enemy to speak louder in my life. I don't know, but that's how I wrestle with this stuff. It's just very complicated. That's why I read it, because I don't want to say it wrong, because it is complex. But I think that that's how God needs to be understood, how the issues need to be understood. God would like to bless every one of his children as he blessed Job, but his fairness limits him. As God makes his love manifest to his children, he must permit Satan to present his case as well. On the other hand, since God knows our limitations, he will not allow the balance of evidence to swing disproportionately in Satan's direction either, for this would also deny our freedom of choice. God will never allow us to be tempted beyond what we are able to bear. With each temptation, he will provide a way out. We're never stuck with a temptation. We're never stuck with God either. We can opt out at any time. Combining these concepts, we can see that we are not bound to fall into a particular temptation simply because we have been tempted. Neither we're obligated to serve God merely because he has provided a way out. He continuously maintains this delicate balance in our lives. Maybe it goes a little bit one way, maybe it goes the other way, but as soon as possible, he brings that balance back. Now, I presume that some of that will happen after the earth is over, after evil is out of the way. That's when some of us will experience the fullness of this balance that I am trying to describe. A true Christian, after giving consideration to the alternatives, looking at the map, surrenders his life to Christ. He is settled in the truth. Like Job, he can say, "For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God." A Job-like person understands that the ambiguity created by Satan's temptation is intended only to make him reconsider his choice, a process that God, in all fairness, has to allow. So, as we examine the scriptures, this ambiguity evaporates. As we look at the map, the truth becomes clearer and clearer, and we become settled in the truth as Job was. Satan creates this ambiguity through both positive and negative means. In some cases, such as Job's, he uses suffering. Yeah, for some of us, suffering could lead us away from God. In other cases, such as Solomon's and Joseph's, he employs success, reputation, power, and so on. He'll use whichever means is most effective for that person. So don't assume that just because somebody has a better life than I have, they have it easier than I do. We are all challenged, and Satan has an opportunity to cause each of us to reconsider or reevaluate our commitment to God. A tactic that has a positive effect on one may have a negative effect on the other. Satan challenges each one with the means calculated to be the most effective for that particular person. To Satan, the means are unimportant as long as he can cause us to doubt and to move away from God. He doesn't care how he does it. As long as he can take our mind away from God, break our commitment to God, then he is happy. Humanity yearns for a clear conception of truth. There is so much error, so much lying going on, so much confusion about so many things, including God, that humanity is yearning for a clear conception of truth. Every effort from Satan is to distort the picture of God. And that's why we said this morning about the rock, Moses hitting the rock. That was obscuring the picture of God that God was wanting to deliver to Israel at such a critical point. When the picture of God is distorted, it destroys us. Paul tells us that by beholding him, we become changed. The spirit of prophecy says it is a law of nature that we become like the person we admire. So if we admire the wrong person, we have a wrong picture of God, then we are destroyed. And I can show you many passages that point that. I will point to the story of Saul. Remember Saul of Tarsus again? He's going on the road to Damascus. He is persecuting Christians. He is famous for putting in jail those who disagreed with his concept of God. That was his way of evangelism. He is now confronted with this light and that voice that says, I am whom you are persecuting. Now, that picture of God that he had developed, which was so wrong, is challenged by this new picture, Jesus. I am the one whom you are persecuting. And he moves the picture of Jesus and substitutes that for the wrong picture of God that he had. And then we have the converted Paul that wrote the love chapter and many other beautiful chapters about love and about God. So the transformation that happens with having the appropriate picture of God is the healing, is where the healing is. And that's what we're looking for. And I think in this particular time, in this particular context, with so much evil going on, it is an even greater opportunity to elevate the picture of God, to clarify the picture of God, because the contrast is so much clearer. But also because the opportunities are present. People are asking questions. They're struggling. They're thinking that God is punishing us. And God doesn't do things like that. And I'd like to finish with that little statement from the Spirit of Prophecies that says that not until the character of Christ is perfectly revealed, and like Dr. Provancha used to say, that's not a statement of perfect revelation, but that's not a perfect, how do I say? That's not a statement about sinless perfection, but perfect revelation, something like that. Yeah. Even the president of the division who is retiring, he wrote, you probably saw it in the Review and Herald, unless the picture of love, and unless the love of God is revealed by his people, he says, the end will not come. He is retiring, and he was giving that as one of his conclusions to the whole church. I think that that's where it's at. Reveal the picture of God. The greatest service that I can perform as a follower of Jesus Christ, the greatest service that I can perform is to deliver to others the clearest picture of God that I can give. That is the clearest picture of love that I can deliver. The greatest damage that I can cause is to deliver a wrong picture of God. May God bless us. Do we pray now? Or do you? He will pray. Yeah.
Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. Okay. Father, how important it is to have these moments to refresh our mind with who we are, why we're here, what you have in mind for your children, the part that we might have in that process, and the experience that we are able to have while we get to know you better. Thank you, Lord, for reminding us of your love. Thank you for coming into this world and dying on the cross to deliver the clearest picture of love that the universe has ever seen, including us. And Father, it is our desire to deliver a clearer picture than we are. We want to deliver the clearest picture that we can to others. Father, continue to give us strength, to continue to give us wisdom, to continue to give us understanding, so that our work, our activities may be consistent with what you have in mind, consistent with the goals and the dreams that you have for your children, is our prayer. In your name, amen.